Okay. So my name is Ileana, and I just want to welcome you to the Standards Advisor webinar. I will be your producer this evening, so I'll kind of just be running the PowerPoint and along with Jenna, just kind of be filtering questions and doing all that kind of stuff. So this webinar will be presented by myself and Jenna, and Nancy, who's another specialist, will be also on the webinar listening. Our goal is to provide you all as advisors with the most up-to-date information regarding standards. So I'm going to go ahead and start this slideshow. Okay. I hope everybody can see it okay. Okay, so before we start the presentation, I want to take a moment to ensure that everybody is ready and familiar with the webinar control panel. So if you see on the right side of your screen, you'll see the attendee control panel, and on the left side should be the webinar viewer window. So you guys should all be able to see it now since my webinar has begun and my screen is up. The control panel can be minimized or expanded by clicking on the horizontal double arrow button in the upper left corner. Minimizing the panel allows a better view of the presentation. So if you want to go ahead and take a second to practice that. And so I want to go over a few other things that you guys should just be aware of. So there's a raise your hand button. It's located on the left side of the control panel, and it allows you to virtually raise your hand if you have a question or if you want to respond to a question being asked by us as presenters. Click the button to raise your hand now, and then clicking again will lower your hand. So go ahead and practice that. Perfect. Okay. And then another important feature on the control panel is the questions pane. So to submit a question, type it into the question box. These may be questions related to the presentation, or if you have any technical questions related to our GoToWebinar system. Please send a quick note really quickly in your questions pane, just so we can make sure that everybody knows how to work that. And just so you know, questions can be submitted at any time. We will monitor them and we will try to respond quickly if we see something that shouldn't wait until the question and answer period. So during our presentation, if there's something that can be quickly addressed and we feel like is important, we'll go ahead and answer it then. If not, then we will go ahead and wait until the question and answer those there. So just a few other things. Be sure to stay attentive and to interact as much as possible during the webinar. The quality of your experience depends on your attention and participation. Try to avoid distractions of responding to email, checking Facebook, instant messaging, or working on other tasks at your computer. If you need to step away for a moment, that's totally okay, but just do not close the GoToWebinar window, as you will be required to log in again if you wish to rejoin the session. If you experience problems with the audio, there's a possible solution of using a conference call number to listen to the presentation using your own telephone. So click use the telephone option in the audio pane of your control panel to view the conference call number. So again, if you're having any issues, you can go ahead and use that instead. And the webinar is being recorded, and it should be available online in the archives to view on the CAPA website in probably 2 weeks or so. So if there are no questions for now, we will begin, and I will let Jenna start.
Great, thanks, Ileana. So as Ileana mentioned, this is the Standards Advisor Training webinar. Specifically, we broke it up into 4 different webinars, just especially for questions. The content is all the same in the PowerPoint, but sometimes our questions vary depending on if the chapter is a small chapter or a large chapter, a housed chapter or an unhoused chapter. So tonight we're doing the small and housed chapters. And like Ileana said, my name's Jenna Wiesner, and I am one of Colette Rangish, the Director of Standards, one of her assistants. And then Ileana Erin had some flight delays, so she's not on right now. And then Nancy Worsley are three of our standards specialists on our team. And you can click to the next slide, Ileana. So Colette Rangish is our Director of Standards, and so she oversees all of our chapters, and she's our go-to person when we need help with standards. Katie Meehan and myself are Colette's two assistants, and we basically have the country split in two. I pretty much have from the Midwest over to California, and Katie has from a little bit of the Midwest over to the East Coast, basically, that we oversee. And then we are currently mentoring 6 standard specialists each. And Katie and I also serve as standard specialists. So as I mentioned before on the call, we have Ileana, and she's the standard specialist for our Theta district. Erin Grumley, who's having some flight issues right now, is our standard specialist for Pi district, and Nancy Worsley is our standard specialist for Delta. Just for, I guess, your own knowledge, I live in Illinois, and so does Nancy. And then Ileana and Erin both live in warmer climates. Ileana lives in New Mexico, and Erin lives in California. So just for your own reference, we're spread out a little bit just between the 4 of us. And as I mentioned, Katie and I serve, in addition to being assistants, we also serve as standard specialists I serve for Epsilon District and Katie for Beta. And we'll get into that structure here in a little bit too, so it will make more sense. You can go on to the next slide for me. Thank you. So today we are going to review some things that we pulled from an advisor survey that went out last year, and we used the answers to that survey to build the content for this webinar. And our goal is to get through the content in 30 minutes so that we have 30 minutes for questions if you all have a lot of questions, which we hope you do. So basically we're going to cover the standards team structure, the way a standards committee should be organized, the responsibilities of the committee, the responsibilities that you have as an advisor, the communication reports, who to send what to, what requires prior approval from most often Colette, the role of the liaisons, some hot topics and standards, and then we'll move on to any questions that you all may have.
Okay. So this is Ileana again. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the standards team structure. So our team has been adjusted to pilot a new structure. Right now, standards currently has expanded our team from 2 assistants to 14 specialists, and this new structure will be hopefully voted upon, or sorry, not hopefully, will be voted upon at the 2016 convention. So each specialist works with 6 to 13 chapters on a weekly basis. We, as specialists, will communicate weekly regarding minutes and probation forms. And our plan is to continue with the expanded team for standards regardless of the convention vote. So the way that standards is right now, the way that we've expanded our team will continue to stay regardless of the vote at convention. So just so you all know, we all do our best to include advisors in communication. Remember that chapter officers are to self-govern themselves, so you may not always be, it may not always be possible depending on the situation. Please be sure that you as advisors are listed as the standard advisor in key reports, and be sure your email address is updated on the CAPA website so you receive all relevant information from headquarters. Standards has typically had a team larger than just the director of standards and assistants in the team. It's just not as public. So we found that the larger team better supports our chapters. And as I said before, we'll just be continuing in this format regardless of the convention vote. In only one semester with our new structure, we've already seen huge successes with the increase in communication, in building relationships with VPS and the VPS advisor, faster response times to chapters, and better support for our chapters on a whole. Please remember that we volunteers are human. If there are any concerns about hearing different responses from us as specialists, your PDC, RDC, the Assistant Director of Standards, or the Director of Standards, please let us know. We'd be more than happy to jump on a conference call so everyone can be on the same page and we can kind of just hash it out all together. And just remembering that every day is a learning opportunity. So we learn new things from the VPSs and the advisors, new great ideas, everything like that. So just being patient with us is helpful, and we will be patient with you all as well. So right now, if there are any questions, please feel free to ask them. Go ahead and use your question button, and we will go ahead and kind of search through those and answer those as those come up. Okay, Jenna, are there any questions?
I don't see any in particular to this slide, so you all can keep thinking about it, and if you have one, just feel free to send it in, and we can keep going.
Alrighty. So then I'm going to keep going to the committee organization. So our standards committee, it consists of our VPS, chapter president, new member chairman, sits on the committee for the entire term. So they don't just sit for the time that there are new members, they sit for the entire term. There's a member at large, you as advisors, and one member from each academic class. So deviation from the structure requires permission from the PDC and RDC. So for some reason, the chapter is not following the laid out structure. They should have gotten, or they need to get permission from their PDC and RDC, so that way we can kind of figure out what would be better and why they're not using it at this point. If members are unable to serve on the committee during an investigation, you may pull committee members temporarily from the Academic Excellence Committee, as they have been elected to a role requiring confidentiality. So just as standards, the Academic Excellence Committee does require confidentiality, and so it becomes a little bit easier for us to pull from those committees should we need it. Chapter members do not get to choose who is in on the conference. There should never be any one-on-one meetings, so a VPS should never meet one-on-one with members. If committee deems that a smaller group is necessary, that group should be comprised of the president, VPS, and you as advisors. We always like to have at least those three sitting on a meeting, just so everything is fair and there's no she said situations. We all kind of have support from one another, just so we never run into a situation where we didn't have enough people present to really be able to understand what was going on. The responsibilities of the committee, just so you all know, these responsibilities will be covered in the VPS training on February 8th in detail. So I'm going over these with you now, but the VPSs will be given the same information when they go through their training on February 8th. So committees should meet once a week. Weekly meetings should be happening even if there are no member conferences. We should be discussing programming, sisterhood, any concerns as a house, anything like that. We should be talking about those on a weekly basis. Member conferences, so just so as a reminder, advisor must be present for member conferences. Again, that's just to kind of make sure that everything is being done fairly and just, and we don't have any issues going forward with, with any miscommunication. Everybody is present on those times. The committee must communicate with the standards advisors, standards specialists, PDC, the assistant director of standards, and the director of standards as well. They should also make sure to consult the specialists weekly, but also the assistant and director of standards for the larger issues. So the nice thing is we kind of all try to keep each other in the loop of when things are going on. We always make sure that people are copied on emails, but it always is just really helpful to make sure that everybody's included with the larger issues. The committee should also submit minutes and reports weekly to the standards reports at kkg.org within 48 hours. So we have been asking, this is really important to note, that they need to be submitted within 48 hours. This is a new time frame, but it is really important that this is done, because it gives us as specialists and PDCs and RDCs and assistants enough time to give, to give any information or to assist with any situations before it's too late. So we found that if, we're getting minutes a week later, things have already kind of passed and fizzled out and we can't really help with situations. So it's really, really important that these are getting into the standards reports at kkg.org within 48 hours so we can go ahead and respond promptly. The committee should also communicate regularly with the liaison officers. We'll go over liaisons a little bit later, but they should be communicating with these liaison officers very frequently. And they should also uphold fraternity standards and help educate the chapter. So a lot of the times people kind of leave, or committee members kind of leave this just to the VPS, and we're really asking that the whole committee make sure that they're upholding our fraternity standards and really help with the education of the chapter. So it's not just falling on the VPS or the president or even the advisor. We really want everybody involved. So to continue, sorry about that. To continue with responsibilities, they should maintain confidentiality. And as you all are aware, confidentiality is really, really important, and we need to make sure that our committees and our members are really doing this and holding each other accountable to hold this confidentiality. They're also supposed to help with spirit and morale, which is also a really important component of the standards committee. A lot of the time, spirit and morale kind of gets lost by the wayside, and we really want to make sure that everybody on the standards committee is involved in this, as it's a way to get people involved and excited and to see a different side of the standards committee, not just necessarily when we're having to deal with members and in the member conferences. Other responsibilities include the new member conferences, loss of membership, and the emergency information cards. So these are online only. If some of you may remember, they were paper form, but now they're only online. The VPS is the chairman of the fireside ceremony, which is during initiation, usually on a Friday night or whenever it's the night before our initiation ceremony. So making sure that they're aware that they are the chairman of that, and they are responsible for getting that together along with the marshal. And the VPS also presides in the absence of the president. So should something happen with the president where she can't be present, the VPS kind of steps in to help maintain the chapter at that point. And I'll pass this one to Jenna.
Thank you, Ileana. So next we're going to talk about the advisor responsibility. So what all of you what kind of our expectations are for an advisor. So first, you are all such an important part of the standards committee. I know that the chapter women really look up to all of you, and we hope that they take your time into consideration and that they listen to you and take your input too. So just know that you're definitely thanked by us, that's for sure. First, it's really important that an advisor is present for any member conference that may result in disciplinary action. So of course we won't always know, we shouldn't know what's going to happen when a member is called into a standards conference, but if a member is called in for a conference, some sort of action will be taken or some sort of questions will be asked where we want an advisor present for that. Ileana, Nancy, and I are all volunteers too, and we know that life happens and we have families and jobs and things that take time, so if you can't physically be present for a meeting, it's definitely okay to Skype in or conference call in to a meeting. That still definitely counts as you being present. It's definitely a little bit harder. I've Skyped and conference called into a couple committee meetings lately, and it's definitely harder to hear and really be there and give your opinion, but it will do, and we understand that sometimes that's just what has to happen. So definitely don't feel bad if you need to do that from time to time. An advisor also must physically sign all the probation forms. So there's really great apps for smartphones. Genius Scan is probably my favorite. It's a free app, and the VPS can just take a picture of the probation form with the Genius Scan, and she can send it to you via email through that app. It's really easy. And then you can do the same. Sign it, take a picture of it, and send it right back to her. It's pretty quick. So if anyone has any questions on that or wants to learn more about that, definitely reach out to your standards specialist and they can help you. We also really value advisors' input to the committee, determining what action to take. Our chapters, this is a little bit tricky though, because our chapters are self-governing, so we definitely don't want to tell them what to do. But giving them advice and input definitely gives the committee a different perspective. It's also comforting sometimes for the member who's being called in that there's someone there other than just her peer. Sometimes it's hard when you're sitting in front of the women who are ultimately your friends, and listening to them, tell you that they're disappointed in you. And so it's nice to sometimes have someone else who's just a center, a ground, and able to tell them what she thinks and kind of coax it along to make sure everything's going okay. Just to make sure that we're letting our chapter self-govern, always just point them to the right resources the best you can. So, point out all the different documents that they have available to them, like our fraternity bylaws and standing rules, and their chapter documents and the suggested guidelines of probation term ideas, and point them out to the VPS and her committee so that they can use those resources to make their decisions. That's the way that I would recommend doing it. One thing to point out too when I was talking about the signatures is that we're moving towards requiring that we receive the actual physical signature on the document. So it used to be fine that the VPS typed in your name where your signature block is, or the advisor would be able to just write back in the email and say, yes, I approve this probation form. But the reason why I was talking about Genius Scan is because we're moving towards requiring a physical signature. It's so important for us to have all of the documentation in the best way possible for all of these standards conferences. Just for if something comes up in the future with this member, we need to have everything filled out in great detail. So that's why we're moving towards this. It takes a little bit extra effort, but I promise Genius Scan is really easy to use, and I would encourage you all to download it. And then finally, make sure that you're included on all the emails sent from the VPS. I know our standard specialists really try when they reply to the VPS to include you, the PDC, and RDC, just because we want to make sure you're on the same page and you're not left in the dark. You're our eyes and ears actually on campus and with the committee, and we want to make sure that you're understanding everything we're saying back to the VPS as well. So after I just talked your ear off there, is there any questions so far about any of the responsibilities of the committee or your role as an advisor? If you have any, you can type them into the pane, or you can hold them till the end, whatever you all want.
All right. So I'm going to move on to communication and reports. So it's really important that when they're sending email correspondence to use the following subject line. So you can see on the screen, it's the chapter name, meeting date, and the subject of the email. That's really helpful for us as specialists to kind of keep everything together, and for us to understand what chapter it's coming from, the date that it was, everything like that. As well as the PDCs and RDCs, they're getting a lot of emails from different chapters, so it's just really helpful for us to keep it all organized and not have to really search. It's much easier for us to find something. Always send signed probation forms, warning of probation forms, and minutes in the same email. So making sure that it's all condensed after a meeting is held, making sure that the minutes are all sent in with the probation forms and the warning of probation forms. We do understand that sometimes things kind of get forgotten, and that's totally okay, but if we really can get into the habit of having them sent in the same email, it's just really easy for us to keep it organized again. And we don't have to go looking for minutes and then forms going along with those minutes. So making sure that those are in the same email. If you have a question you need answered quickly, first we would suggest to consult the fraternity bylaws, standing rules, and policies, as well as the chapter documents. So making sure to look, those have everything, all the information that you would need in those. For us as specialists and the director of standards, I know for Jenna, if we ever have any questions that we don't know the answer to, that is the first thing that we do, is we consult our documents, which is really helpful. The chapter documents are helpful as well because they are tailored a little bit more towards the chapter. But, the fraternity bylaws, standing rules, and policies are really important. If not, then you want to consult the standards resources chain of command. So the first one would be the advisor. So the VPS would go to you as advisors. If you all don't know the answer, then you would go to us as the standards specialist. Then the PDC, RDC, Assistant Director of Standards, and then the Director of Standards. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the nice thing is we all are really trying to get in the habit of including all of these people, usually not the Director of Standards, just depending on what it is, but the rest, the Assistant Director of Standards, RDC, PDC, and then you as the advisor, as well as the VPS. We're trying to get in the habit of including all of these people on all of the emails we sent so everybody is in the loop. And that kind of helps with back and forth. If we have questions, if we need clarifications, all of us can kind of be on the same email. Continuing on this, the next one is who gets what reports and when. So minutes are sent weekly to you as the advisor, the PDC, RDC, and the standards reports at kkg.org. So I know we've had a little bit of confusion as far as who to send it to this past semester, and it is a new process. So this is what we're asking for right now. We've had advisors ask for a cheat sheet in the past of who gets what forms, but the nice thing is all forms have recipients listed on them on the actual documents. So there's not a, you don't necessarily need a cheat sheet. All you need to do is look at the actual document itself, and it'll tell you who needs to get it. As far as the standards reports at kkg.org, .org, those get uploaded, and as a specialist, we can go ahead and see that. So the specialists have their own emails, but the standards reports at kkg.org is uploaded. All the documents sent there are uploaded to a portal where we can see everything. So I know that some of the VPSs in the past have wondered about that, but everything that gets sent to the standards reports, we can see that. So making sure that those go there. Warning of probation forms and probation forms are sent to the advisor, PDC, RDC, and the standards reports at kkg.org immediately after imposing probation. So again, as soon as this happens, that's why we're asking for that 48-hour window. We really, really need these to be on there so we can consult and make sure that everything is being done correctly, and we can jump in if we need to jump in. Warning of probation forms. Probation forms and minutes must be sent in the same email as I said before. And lots of membership forms are sent to you as the advisor, PDC, RDC, and the standards reports at kkg.org. So as you can see, most of our forms are sent to those advisors, PDCs, RDCs, and the standards reports at kkg.org. All of this stuff usually. The only other things, and we'll go over this a little bit later, is when we need approval from the Director of Standards or the Assistant Director of Standards, and that's when they would be included on those emails. But besides that, the minutes, probation forms, warning of probation forms, loss of membership forms are sent to those core email addresses and people. Any questions should be sent to this advisor, specialist, PDC, and I've seen a lot of chapters including the RDC as well. Again, this just kind of helps with fluid communication for all of us. And just so you guys are aware, because the standard specialists aren't included on the email of the minute submission, this email should just be attachments. Any questions need to be sent on another email to us so that way we can keep it all straight. So that's just kind of can be a little bit tricky, but we kind of are trying to work on that as well. So what requires prior approval from the Director of Standards or the assistants? So I'm going to quickly read off of these, and then I'll go a little bit more into detail about what they mean. So active member probation exceeding 10 weeks. This also includes extensions. New member probation exceeding 6 weeks, also including extensions. Active member requested resignation and dismissal. So this is only for requested resignation and dismissal. Does the Director of Standards need to approve this prior to this happening? New member broken pledge to membership, and social probation. So if the probation or extension for both new member or for active members exceeds the 10 weeks and for new members exceeds the 6 weeks, you need the VPS needs to reach out to the Director of Standards prior to putting the probation in effect. So if the VPS thinks that it may go this route beforehand, before the meeting takes place, they can get approval from the Director of Standards prior to the meeting with the committee and the individual member, so you can have options available to you. So, you can ask for that permission beforehand. You don't necessarily have to use it, but if you are given permission beforehand, you will be able to use it during the meeting if the committee and the advisor and the VPS feels it necessary. For the requested resignation, dismissal, and the broken pledge, you need to have approval. The VPS needs to get approval before mentioning this as a course of action to a member. So we are not able to say that this is even an option until the Director of Standards is talked to and given more information. I know sometimes it can be tempting for members to be given this information beforehand, but we really just need to get this requested beforehand. We don't want to be throwing this around. Social probation. So social probation is the ability to assign a probation term restricting members from attending social events for behavior issues. So social probation is something that kind of gets thrown around as well, but you definitely, as chapters, definitely need approval from the Director of Standards and the Assistant Director of Standards before this happens. So I know that the Assistant Director of Standards have been really, really great about laying this out and what the approval process looks like. So that is super important that this is done. Social probation should not be used unless permission is given. So approval is now given for the academic year. So approval was given for fall 2015, spring 2016. So any chapter who's currently using social probation will have to reapply each year. So it's not something that goes on and on and on. Each chapter must reapply each year. So after the chapter receives Director of Standards and Assistant Director of Standards approval, they must educate the chapter and hold a chapter vote to place into effect. So just because the VPS and her committee gets approval from the Director of Standards and the assistant, they do also have to get a chapter vote in order for this to be in effect. Social probation is only allowed for approved behavior. So for example, if it's approved for attendance, the VPS and the committee can only assign it for that specific purpose. So they cannot also assign it to a member who was sent home from a social unless it's included. So anything that they want to include in the social probation has to be outlined. Anything else cannot social probation cannot be used for that. And we get a lot of questions on that, and we are happy to kind of work through those types of things with chapters, but we definitely do not take social probation lightly, and that's something that we definitely ask chapters to get prior approval, and we have a long conversation about it before it's given approval, so that way we can make sure that it's being used in the correct manner and that we don't have any issues on it being used incorrectly. So I'm going to give time again for questions. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to submit those. Oh, I'm so sorry. I totally forgot that I have screen access. I apologize for going through the PowerPoint so quickly. But if anyone has questions, please send those to us. And if not, then we will continue.
There was one question that came in while you were talking, Ileana, and I wanted to share with the group because it was a good one. Someone asked if any chapter advisor can sign the probation form. So that was a great question. The answer is yes and no, I guess. So it has to be the advisor at the standards meeting. So if you as a standards advisor couldn't make it to a meeting that week and you had a different advisor sit in, because maybe she lives in the same city as well, and she sat in for that meeting, she'd be the one that needs to sign that form. But if you sat in the meeting and weren't able to sign the form for whatever reason right then and there, it can't be another advisor that signs it for you. So whatever advisor is present at the standards committee meeting needs to sign the form. So hopefully that makes sense, but that was a good question. So thank you for asking that. So not seeing any other questions, I will move on to the liaisons. So this is something that we really started making a big focus over the last year. And there are some really great webinars called Working Together series that Katie and I did with some RDCs and PDCs, and there's 6 of them to represent the 6 liaisons, and they can be found on the CAPA website under the VPS resources. They're about 15 minutes each of just a pre-recorded webinar just explaining the relationship between the standards committee and that particular officer, whether it be academic excellence or finance, etc. So I highly recommend encouraging your standards committee to watch those webinars and then to watch them yourself too. They seem to be helpful and point out exactly what the relationship should be between the officers. So hopefully, once your new VPS took over and the committee was assigned, the VPS worked with the committee members to help assign each person to a liaison duty, and then that person would then work with the chapter council officer, reporting either weekly or biweekly. We understand there might not be a report every week, so biweekly would be fine. Just reaching out to that officer. So if they're the academic excellence liaison, they'd reach out to that officer maybe every other week just to check in to see if the academic excellence committee has any concerns with anyone. Do they need to refer anyone to the standards committee? And just checking in and giving back her feedback to the standards committee. Attendance is a big one that I think definitely should be communicating probably every single week too, especially once the semester gets started. We never want the attendance to get out of hand, because then all of a sudden someone might have 8 unexcused absences and they've never been called into standards yet. So we want to make sure we try and stay on top of that so that we're going off whatever the chapter bylaws and standing rules say, whether it be 3 unexcused absences and then they're called to standards or whatever their documents say. We want to make sure we're staying on top of that. So that's just another reason why it's so important for the liaisons to be reporting back each week or every other week. Another example would be if the treasurer has a list of women who haven't paid their dues yet, they would tell the finance liaison on the committee, and then that liaison would report at the next standards committee meeting that, you know, Jenna hasn't paid her dues yet, and we'll need to call her into standards next week to talk to her about that and find out what's going on. So that's another example. It's a good way, too, for the VPS to delegate duties and get the entire committee involved in the standards process. A lot of times the VPS has a lot put on her shoulders, and you know, the committee is there for a reason to support the VPS and to make sure that the chapter is running smoothly, and it's just a great way to delegate and give some responsibility to the 6 committee members as well. So I think that's it for that. I know it's something that we've definitely brought in and put a lot of emphasis on, so if there's ever any questions, feel free to reach out to your standards specialist on different ways to make sure the liaisons are being used properly.
Okay, so going through our current resources, many of the resources that were asked for in the survey already exist. So if the paper resources aren't enough, we're encouraging VPSs and advisors to go to the human resources for help or advice. So that would be us as standards specialists. We can reach out to the assistant director of standards, PDCs, RDCs, but if you have a question or you need something that is not already provided, please don't hesitate for you as advisors to reach out or for VPSs to reach out as well. As most of you are probably aware, all the resources are posted on the CAPA website, usually under the VPS, under the Vice President of Standards tab under the chapter resources. So please consult those and encourage your VPSs to look at those as well. Our fraternity bylaws, so basically our preamble that is used at the beginning of our fraternity bylaws is really good to use in all situations. It's really helpful to use that because it's part of our documents, and it's helpful to use that as kind of a guiding resource for people to understand maybe where their behaviors didn't align with what our fraternity expects of us. Also using our membership or member commitment statement, that again is also really helpful, and our members sign it yearly that they agree to our documents and expectations, and those should be reviewed with the members during conferences. So again, that's just another way for members to be held accountable to things that they agree to on a yearly basis, and it's just another way to help the VPS and the committee use our documents as their guiding forces rather than feeling like they don't have anything really to guide them. Another really great resource is the suggested guidelines for specific situation. So it lists probation term ideas and how to handle 16 situations, plus also how to do some spirit and morale type stuff. So this is just really helpful, so that way, if there's a specific situation, usually there's a term on there that can be useful. Again, if not, if there's something more, or you're just not finding what you feel like you like on the specific situations guideline, please reach out to the specialist, and we can go ahead and see if we can give you more ideas, something that may resonate with the chapter member or with the committee, something that the committee feels is a little bit better for the specific situation. Again, as Jenna mentioned, the working together webinars, which is useful in the specific liaison positions. So basically, it helps the VPS and the standards committee members understand how they work with the 6 other positions. If they have a specific liaison that they are working with, it's really helpful for them to watch. It's about a 20-minute, maximum 20-minute webinar for them just to have some ideas of how to work with those positions as well. And then the standards committee tutorials. It gives a mock standards meeting. So a lot of the times, it's great to review with the new committee to see what a meeting should look like and how it should go. And it's also really good for the chapter to see this as well, so they have an idea of what to expect with the standards conference. I know a lot of the times when someone's called into standards and they don't really know what's going to happen, there's a lot of preconceived notions, rumors, and all that kind of stuff. So by showing the mock standards meetings and a chapter meeting, it may be really helpful for people to understand what to expect and to maybe lower their anxiety, or to have a better idea of what they should expect going into the meeting. So that's also another really nice resource that is on the website. Some future resources. So there's going to be a women's health and a mental health workshop at the 2016 convention by some mental health experts. So I'm actually one of the mental health experts that's working with Colette, the director of standards, along with some other experts to kind of put on a workshop. We have found that there's a large concern for many chapters as far as figuring out what to do when mental health and health issues arise with individual members. So we're hoping that the workshop at convention can kind of help some of those situations a little bit. Again, if you as an advisor have never dealt with this before, consider yourself lucky, because unfortunately it is coming more prominent, more and more on each campus. So if you haven't dealt with it yet, unfortunately, you're probably going to deal with it in the future, whether that be in your capacity as a standards advisor or as another advisor later on. It usually does come up with mental health issues. So if you do know of a convention, of a chapter member or even an advisor going to the 2016 convention, I would definitely ask them to go to that workshop, because I think it's going to be really helpful for us to kind of give some tools of what we should do in situations, and kind of some outside resources of how to deal with these hard situations. We also instituted a mandatory gender-based violence prevention presentation and a resource guide in the fall. So as specialists, we really tried to hone in on making sure that each of our chapters got these in, specifically the resource guide, and that's a good way for the chapter to kind of be aware of the outside resources that are available on campus and within the community, just in case members in standards need that extra help. There's some extra resources listed on that resource guide. If you are not sure that the chapter has completed this resource, the resource guide in the gender-based violence prevention presentation, please ask the VPS first, and if you still haven't gotten an answer, you're more than welcome to reach out to us as specialists, and we can go ahead and tell you whether or not we've been told that this has been done. New staff members have been working on compiling past investigation techniques used by fraternity council and by chapters into one investigative process. So Once it's completed, we will have a resource to provide to chapters. So it'll be useful, hopefully, in using standards to deal with your problems. And then also there's actually a webinar that's using standards to deal with your problems, on how to approach situations and how to kind of deal with some of those tougher situations that sometimes our VPSs struggle to deal with. So definitely looking at those resources and the future resources for help as things arise and as issues kind of come up within the chapter.
Great, thank you, Ileana. So lastly, we're going to cover some most common issues and hot topics in standards. So in fall 2015, there were 2,483 probation forms turned in and 609 warning of probation forms turned in to our standard specialists. And the largest issues that were addressed were attendance, conduct, and alcohol. So you're probably wondering how we know how that many probation forms and that many warning on probation forms were turned in. So our standard specialists track the number of probation forms and warnings that are received every semester. So we have an Excel sheet, each one of us does, that tracks exactly what the probation form was turned in for, whether it be attendance, conduct, scholarship, finance, social media. Those are just a few of the different areas. This allows us to see the trends facing our chapters, each chapter individually and then also as a whole. As I mentioned, the largest issues, and these have been the largest issues for the last few years actually, but attendance, conduct, and alcohol-related issues have been our top three. Obviously, the issues differ amongst chapters. Some have a higher prevalence than certain issues than others, but I would say your chapter probably sees those three at least a little bit, if not most often. Many advisors have asked us for a roadmap on how to handle a specific issue. So, you know, what should we do when there's an attendance issue, or what should we do when there's a housing issue? We're not going to provide that only because our chapters are self-governing and they need to be able to make the decisions that they feel are best. Certainly, the reason why we feel like this new structure for our standards team is working so well is because with 14 specialists, all of us have only 10 chapters, as opposed to the way it was before, where Katie and I had 70 chapters each, and it was virtually impossible for us to really get to know the VPS and you as an advisor and get to know your chapter and be able to give you the time that you deserve. So now that every specialist has around 10 chapters, it's a little bit easier for her to get to know the VPS, the chapter culture, get to know you as the advisor, and answer the questions pretty quickly too. So if there's any questions where the VPS wants to handle an attendance issue this way and wants to bounce it off a standard specialist or off of you, we definitely encourage that. But we want to make sure that, like I said earlier during the responsibility portion, that the standards committee is making their own decisions. We think a good idea would be to have you as the advisor encourage the standards committee to maybe come up with 3 to 5 of the top issues that the standards committee has faced recently, and to do some role playing with either the committee, just the committee, or even in front of the chapter one evening, maybe during like an educational chapter, to just show the chapter how the standards committee functions when someone's called into standards. Not every chapter member is called into standards during her time as a Kappa, and so sometimes they think standards is a really scary place when it's really not. It can definitely be intimidating, but we want the chapter members to know that the standards committee is there to help and just to make the chapter the best it can be. So we think it'd be a great idea if you would encourage, as the advisor, encourage your standards committee to do some role play amongst themselves, and then also maybe in front of the chapter or the new members, just to give them a feel for what standards means and why the standards committee is there and how they function. You can go on to the next slide, Ileana. So then some hot topics that have just kind of popped up with standards recently is the timeliness when addressing issues. So we want to make sure that the committee knows that they need to take action fairly quickly after something happens. So if something happens regarding alcohol out on a Saturday night and the committee meets on Tuesdays, the committee should really try and take care of it as soon as they can at that next meeting so that it doesn't get out of hand and rumors don't start and things like that. We want to make sure that the committee is meeting weekly so that they can do this and address things as soon as possible. Sometimes committees get confused on whether or not they can place a member on probation if the member doesn't show up to the meeting. And while, of course, we always want to give the member the benefit of the doubt, if she really had to miss a meeting because something came up for class, you can always give her one more chance to come back next week to meet or to come back another night. But definitely don't let that member waste the committee's time. If the committee feels like they need to take care of it right then and there, that member that they're calling in does not need to be present for the meeting. They can place her on probation without her being present. There's a little box in the probation form that the VPS would just need to mark saying that the member was not present for her meeting. A reminder that probation starts the day of the meeting. So if the member gets called in on January 27th, the probation starts on January 27th. It doesn't start on January 28th or 29th. And also, any of the terms that occur during the probation have to be completed during the probation. So something I see an awful lot is if someone didn't complete a certain amount of philanthropy hours and they're given an extra hour to complete, they would have to complete that during their 4-week probation. Say they were put on 4 weeks. It couldn't be complete 1 hour of philanthropy by May. Well, hopefully she's not on probation from now until May for not doing 2 hours of philanthropy. So every term that the VPS assigns to that member has to be within the probationary period. Standards in housing is something that comes up a lot. The standards committee cannot evict a member from the chapter facility regardless of who owns the facility. This is a House board decision and an action. So if something comes to the standards committee regarding housing, I would strongly encourage you to advise your VPS to inform the PDC and RDC so that they can take it and deal with it with the House board. It's not a standards issue yet. Academics is another hot topic. A member cannot be placed on probation solely for her GPA. We went over this a lot last year and sent out a bunch of different communications. So CAPA doesn't have a GPA requirement for a general member. We only have a requirement for officers, someone who's seeking to be an officer, and then for new members hoping to become a Kappa Kappa Gamma. So if it's just a regular old sophomore who's in the chapter, she doesn't have to maintain any sort of GPA. If her GPA is quite low, the VPAE and her committee should really be working with her on a period of concern and making sure that she's getting the help she needs. And if she's being disrespectful to the VPAE or blatantly not going to class after meeting with the VPAE, that would become a standards issue. And certainly check with your standards specialist if you need any help with that, as it does get a little bit confusing. Loss of membership cannot be voluntary if the member is not in good standing. So if the member owes money to the chapter, they're not in good standing. So it would have to be a requested resignation. And there's a process for that too that we can definitely answer for you if you have any questions. Then hopefully you haven't, but you may have seen some emails from headquarters mentioning RNPs, which stand for resignation not processed. Sometimes at the beginning of the semester, the VPS will get a long list of people listed as RNP. She'll get an email from a woman named Jane at headquarters. And the reason that they're getting that email is because maybe the past VPS didn't turn in the paperwork in time, didn't mark them correctly in the system. So the second the vote occurs for a loss of membership, the VPS needs to send in those forms, and then within 6 weeks, fraternity council will vote on the loss of membership. And then the member should be removed from queue reports by headquarters, and all should be good. If something happens along the way, that's when an email would come from Jane. And hopefully, if we can just stay on task with getting those forms in on time and making sure members are marked correctly in queue reports, hopefully we can steer clear of that. Talking to parents is also another thing we get a lot of questions on. Kappa doesn't have the relationship with the parents. We have the relationship with the member. Our obligation is to the member only. So we should, if you are ever contacted by a parent, please refer them to headquarters, to Colette, or to one of Colette's assistants, myself or Katie. We've had a lot of issues where people have released information to parents and they shouldn't have, and it's really our obligation is only to the member, not to the parents. So it can get sticky sometimes. So when in doubt, don't talk to them. Take a message and pass their information on to one of us. And finally, changing the perception of standards can be tough, but it's something that we think that you as advisors can help us with. Make sure that the membership commitment statement is being reviewed with the chapter. Hold mock standards meetings, like I mentioned before, so the chapter can see the purpose of the committee. Role play with different scenarios. Make sure that the standards committee is doing lots of spirit and morale to boost the confidence within the chapter and keep things happy, even when the standards committee does have to do things that aren't so fun. Be sure that the standards committee is placing the responsibility back on the member who was called in for causing the problems and breaking the rules. A lot of times that member wants to go back and blame the standards committee for her wrongdoings, but try and coach the VPS and her committee to make sure that the member knows that what she did was wrong, and this is why it wasn't right for her to do. So those are just some things that we've seen come up, and hopefully that's helpful to you. And now if there's any burning questions, if you want to type them into the question pane, we can answer them out loud for everyone, or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can definitely reach out to us afterwards. We prefer not to get too chapter specific with questions. Just more of a generalized question would be great at this point. Let's see any yet, but I'll give it a couple more minutes and just remind you all about the February 8th officer training webinar for the VPS. So February is officer training month for all the different chapter council officers. So there's, I guess, 18 webinars that will occur in February. And so, of course, the VPS webinar is one of them, and it's on February 8th, where Colette, Katie, and myself will be going over the duties of the VPS. Some of the slides that we showed you tonight overlap into that webinar, and then there's some different slides too that show how a minutes form should be filled out and a probation form. It's really the nuts and bolts of standards. So if you're able to join us on February 8th, we'd love to have you. That webinar will also be recorded, so if you're not able to join us on February 8th, it will be recorded and placed on the CAPA website within about 2 weeks, just as these advisor webinars will be on the website as well. So if you have, I don't see any questions in the question pane, so hopefully we answered all of them, but if you do have any that you think of or they were more chapter specific, feel free to, again, I'm Jenna, you can send me an email at the KKG assistant email address that's listed up here on the screen, or to Colette, or you can send it to your standard specialist. Hopefully you got a welcome email from that person in the last couple weeks introducing herself, so feel free to ask her too. She's an expert in standards as well. So we really appreciate you taking the time tonight to tune in and learn more about advising standards. And again, thank you for all that you do on the front lines with the chapters. We really appreciate it. You're the eyes and ears for us. So if there's anything, any resources you're missing or anything that we can do better to help you, please don't hesitate to let us know.
I will echo what Jenna said. Thank you so much for your time, and please, please, please let us know what we can do to help. We're always here to help, and we'll do our best to get you the best resources and information that we can.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.